Good morning. Welcome to First Parish. I have the honor and pleasure to be your servant today. Welcome back, whether you've been coming for decades or just joining us, and a very warm welcome to those of you who are visiting for the first time. We're so glad you're here with us today. It's good to see everyone this morning. My name is Sue Andrews. I'm one of the worship associates here at First Parish. Our senior minister is, there she is, Reverend Lisa Perry Wood. This morning, Reverend Lisa is joined by three of her First Parish ministerial colleagues. Reverend Martha Niebank, our Minister Emerita, who served here from 2005 through 2012. Reverend Eliza Blanchard, one of our affiliate ministers, and Judd Wolfskill, our ministerial intern. Today we'll hear reflections on their journeys in ministry. First Parish is a welcoming Unitarian Universalist congregation, open and affirming of all people. Whoever you are, whatever your gifts or abilities may be, however you identify your gender or sexual orientation, wherever your life and faith journey has taken you, you are welcome here. Please take a moment to look over the announcements in the order of service. There are two highlights which I am going to tell you now. Today, after the service, we'll be having a congregational meeting. We'll gather as a congregation to consider whether to amend our bylaws related to membership at First Parish. We'll also be trying out a consensus process. All are welcome to participate in the conversation, though if we do move to amend, only current First Parish memberships will be eligible to vote. Childcare and pizza, not necessarily in that order, will be provided. Second announcement. Next Sunday, after our service, we will rededicate our new Black Lives Matter banner, which is already in place in front of the building. And following that, we'll join in our annual Thanksgiving potluck lunch. If you haven't signed up to bring something, please do that using the link in your order of service or the weekly update. We especially need vegetarian main dishes. As always, all are welcome to the table, whether or not you're able to bring a dish. If this is your first time visiting us, or you haven't done so already in the past, please take a moment to fill out one of these yellow cards. It's visitor cards that you'll find in clear plastic envelopes in the backs of the pews, and place it in the offering plate as it comes around. After the service, everyone is warmly invited to join us for conversation and refreshments through this door right here, proceeding on to Lion Chapel. We encourage both newcomers and long-timers to pick up a striped mug, which indicates an interest in sharing conversation with others you may not know or know well. Welcome to all.
Good morning. What a gift it is for a congregation to be so rich in ministers. Am I right? We are truly blessed, and it is a special pleasure to welcome our Minister Emerita, Reverend Martha Niebank, back to this pulpit today where she served for 7 years, and to be joined by Reverend Eliza and Judd, all of us in different stages of this strange and wonderful calling of ministry. Our worship theme this month is our second UU principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Judging from current events, there is no doubt that we could use more of these qualities in our nation, our institutions, and our lives right now. And to move closer to true justice, equity, and compassion, we will need the faith, hope, and love that we find in gathering here each week. Let's just take a deep breath together. We open this morning with the words of UU Minister Elizabeth Tarbox. This is from Ours is a Story of Faith. I say ours is a story of faith and hope and love. I say it is our need for one another that binds us together, that brings us limping and laughing into relationships and keeps us at it when we otherwise might despair at the fix we are in. I say it is the holy we need, the eternal beyond our comprehension, and one place we can find it is here, working and worshiping together. And I say there is a transcendent value worthy of our loyalty, upon which we may set our hearts, and its divine manifestation is love. Come now, my friends, into this beloved and sacred space, and let us worship together. And now, please rise as you are willing or able, and join in singing our opening hymn, number 108, My Life Flows On.
Thank you, Keith, for playing the organ for us during that song. At this time, I'd like to invite Steve Pratt Otto and Landon Rose to come forward to light the chalice, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith the world over. As they light the chalice, please join me in our unison affirmation printed in your order of service. in English, and then in Spanish. We give ourselves one unto another, covenanting to walk together as a congregation, promising faithfully to watch over one another and to delight for love to abide in our midst. Nos entregamos y nos comprometemos a caminar juntos como congregación, prometiendo con mucha fe cuidarnos mutuamente y deleitarnos en el amor que permanecerá entre nosotros. Each week, we also light 2 candles, one of peace and one of hope, each candle representing a different place on earth that we want to lift up and remember this morning as a sacred encounter with the world. Today, we remember 2 places that we especially hold close in this service and through the week ahead. After each of the candles is lit, we will speak the words for peace in English, Arabic, and Hebrew. Peace, salam, shalom. Our candle of peace is lit for the International Transgender Day of Remembrance, which falls this next Wednesday, November 20. The Transgender Day of Remembrance is an annual observance, an opportunity for communities to come together and honor the memory of transgender people, gender variant individuals, and those perceived to be transgender who have been murdered because of hate. May all our transgender siblings live in safety and know they are not alone. Peace, salam, shalom. Our candle of hope is lit for Carnegie Hall in New York City, home of the Lullaby Project. Musicians and artists at Carnegie Hall invite teen mothers, new mothers, to create special lullabies for their newborn babies. These songs have been shown to aid in bonding between young mothers and their children, as well as to decrease the severity of postpartum depression. That's the Lullaby Project, if you want to Google it. Peace, salam, shalom.
Good morning. I walked in the dark towards the door, which I could identify because it had light coming through on the sides and the bottom. And I could hear Pam and Charles Slade, the parents of my friend Jason, talking on the other side of that wall. I was sleeping over at Jason's house in Rich Square, North Carolina, a few miles away from Murfreesboro, which is where I lived. I knew I would soon move from Murfreesboro to Columbia, South Carolina, so my mother could be closer to her parents, my grandparents. My parents were getting a divorce. Late one night, I had heard my mother crying, and in the morning, my father came in to tell me what was going to happen. As I approached the door, Pam and Charles opened it, and the light streamed out, and they found me, 6 years old and crying. I told them I was homesick. Charles picked me up in his arms and took me back to my room and put me in his lap, and he read me a story, or maybe 2. And as I remember it, after we finished one book, he just sort of sat with me and waited in silence. And then he asked me if I was ready to go back to bed. I said I was, and he lifted me into the bed, and I fell asleep. Maybe it was the very next day, or maybe a few days later, we saw Pam, Charles, and Jason for the first time before I would move to South Carolina. And they anticipated the trip I was going to make. They knew the trip from Murfreesboro to Columbia would be 5 or 6 hours. And they had bought workbooks with activities for the ride. At the beginning of the first workbook, the page offered those tall rows that kids learn to write in, right? A solid row at top and bottom, and a broken row in the middle, or broken line in the middle. Did you ever write on that kind of paper? They had written a note with giant letters. I can't remember the first few lines, but the last words were, "We will miss our friend. We will miss our friend." I still get choked up sometimes talking about it. What I recognize now is that Pam and Charles Slade were the first ministers I'd ever encountered. Fast forward past childhood and young adulthood, and I'm 40 or so, with the wife and the first of 2 daughters, and we started attending First Parish in Sherburne. And in an otherwise uneventful conversation with Reverend Nathan Dietering, my wife and I, the idea of my becoming a minister comes up. And Reverend Nathan suggested I join Worship Associates to help planning worship and the pastoral care team. And another mentor suggested I volunteer at Leonard Morris Hospital in Natick through the chaplain's office. So I would go into a patient's sterile kind of room, kind of institutional, with the same colored sheets and beds and stuff. And I would talk a little bit with the patient. And sometimes, not every time, but sometimes, a space would open up in the room, and the person would testify to what God had done for them, tracking a story of dangerous illnesses and then gradual recuperation, and now he was going to be okay. Or as one man told me, he had lived through the Holocaust and lost religion, but he still cared about people because if you were a professor, you had to. In this period of discernment, ministers suggested I check in with people who knew me well, run the idea of ministry past them, and just kind of see how they reacted. Some people had financial concerns, for sure. My father-in-law said to me, "I see a lot of churches closing. If churches were businesses and I were an investor, I wouldn't invest in them." But no one looked at me and said, "No, I don't see it." No one said, "Nope, that isn't you." Well, it took getting fired from my job and starting my own company before I could go to seminary at Boston University. And since that time, I've met people at a facility in Mexico for people who have been deported back after trying to cross and planned to attempt another crossing, if only to earn money for a wife and child back home. I have visited a Zen center in Cambridge and a Sikh Gurdwara in Revere, and been schooled in the varieties of Latinx music by a seminarian from Puerto Rico. Taking classes, I felt impatient to do the work I was being trained to do. And when I went to my first meeting with the Immigration Justice Committee, I realized that while I had taken a class on immigration, I had no idea how a congregation might engage with the issue, what relationships would be required. And now, walking in a minister's shoes at last, I find pastoral care an abiding thread through it all. Just sitting with someone, listening, and being present for them, as Pam and Charles Slade were present for me so many years ago.
Oh, and now we're going to sing the children out to their classes.
Will you join with me in a time of prayer, meditation, and silence? We bring ourselves to the here and now, breathing in and knowing we are breathing in. Breathing out and knowing we are breathing out. Breathing in, here. Breathing out, now. Here and now. I offer the words of Maya Angelou. When we come to it, we, this people, on this minuscule globe, who reach daily for the bomb, the blade, and the dagger, yet who petition in the dark for tokens of peace. We, this people, on this small and drifting planet, whose hands can strike with such abandon that in a twinkling life is sapped from the living. Yet those same hands can touch with such healing, irresistible tenderness, that the haughty neck is happy to bow and the proud back is glad to bend. When we come to it, we know that we live in a paradox of complexities. When we come to it, we know that we are miraculous beings who can hold both good and evil and continue to love when we come to it. And now we enter a silence together.
Not fair to have to follow that. What more can I say? Except thank you for this opportunity to share a few thoughts about my vocation, my calling as your community minister. When I first heard the call, it was to pastoral ministry. I did what most people do. I was not willing. I protested, but I did stay open. So who was I to take up this work of trying to repair the world, or at least a corner of it? Dear Goddess, who and what did I think I was? And like millions of others along the years, I've fumbled along my path. I've taken detours, but all along I've tried to figure out, what is this covenant, this mutual promise that I hope to make? With whom or with what? And what was the divine anyway? Who did I hope to serve and how? What could I, in good faith, offer, and what did I have a right to expect, if anything, in return? I was worried that the divine might burn out before I did because I was constantly testing their patience. But in my first year, settled in the UU Society of Grafton and Upton, what I had been taught in divinity school met reality, and I found myself at times underprepared and overwhelmed. I realized that the covenant we'd made, that congregation and I, could be mutual for it to be fair and to provide a clear relationship and to avoid burning us all out. At first I felt, let me quote from a poem by Kenneth Koch, which I wish was read at every ordination and installation for clergy and laity to appreciate the promises of those occasions. He writes, "Oh, thank you for giving me this battleship to wash, but I have a rash on my hands and my eyes hurt, and I know so little about cleaning a ship that I would rather clean an island." That kind of sums up how it feels to be handed a congregation. And as I said, lay leaders, you know this too, I'm sure. I think we can all, laity and clergy, relate to the enormity of our covenants if we look at the whole job of work to be done within and without these walls. And we can all agree that it is too big a job for any one person to carry the pastoral needs, the leadership, the everyday tasks, and the cleanup in all forms of even a most beloved community. During my time at Grafton and Upton, I mourned the death of my son's iguana, a 14-year companion to him through the very roughest of teen years, and I got my first dog, a story many of you know about. Slowly, I found myself entering discernment again, revisiting what it was I could promise to try my best to do with goodwill, if not joy, in the world. What I came up with was working with humans and their animal companions and leading worship around my awakening passion for the seventh principle, the interconnected web of all existence. I learned that the promises we make to ourselves, to others, to our higher power can be fluid, need to be at times. We may be called more than once in a lifetime. A covenant is a binding promise or an agreement to do or forbear. Originally, the roots of covenant held the sense of mutuality. My covenant as your affiliate minister has been a doing and a forbearing in the best sense. You provide me with support in the form of a space, in which to work with people from all over Eastern Massachusetts at the most vulnerable time in their lives, mourning a beloved pet. I celebrate the 7th principle with and bless beloved animal companions with other UU congregations as well. And I offer my ministry to you in pet bereavement support and in leading services from time to time. What I have learned and bring to you today is idealism and ego, ministry has taught me, may lead us to agree to clean the whole battleship. As a member of this congregation, my aspiration now is to share the ministry, including the work of ad ministry, which is what committees do, with clergy and staff and all of you. As members and friends, we might best mutually promise something like this. Give me a part of the battleship to clean, if that's what we agree we need, and I'll try to scour it so it shines like the top of the Chrysler Building. In return, let me toot the ship's horn or ring the church bell, help pick our course, cook a dinner, or skateboard along the deck, and we shall have glorious adventures together. Sharing the labor and the delights, that's a covenant I believe we can learn to live with. To be discussed. I'll see you at our congregational meeting after the service.
The offering will now be gratefully received. If you are visiting First Parish for the first time today, please feel free to let the basket pass you by. We're so glad to have you with us.
For all that you have so generously given and for all that we have received, we say thank you. Each of us is called. We each have a ministry, whether we know it or not. Something that moves us, something that calls us on. To serve something greater than ourselves. To follow an urge that comes from deep inside. It might be in the arts, or teaching, in a courtroom or an office, with children or patients, animals or computers. Wherever you are lit up, whether it is paid work or not. For some of us, a light goes on in early childhood, like Judd's story of a family's kindness, and we follow that guiding beam of hope. Each of us looks for the way that we can best use our gifts, brightly polishing our part of the battleship, as Reverend Eliza says. For me, it was an early call, a childhood call, to right the wrongs I saw around me, to make our world a more just place, especially for young people like myself, and for those who didn't have the advantages that I was aware that I had. And there was something else as well, a call to love and connection that I recognized later in my life. Now, I grew up in a small rural town not very far from here. I went to a grade school, very small school, 12 of us in the graduating 6th grade class, 4 boys and 8 girls. Most of us had been together since the very early grades. And the girls, well, we were a pretty tight-knit group. But one friend always stood out for me, and that was Betsy. We lived on the same street. We rode our bikes together. We ran around in the woods. We played hopscotch. Probably some of you actually remember what hopscotch is. I don't think they play that anymore. And we played a million make-believe games. One day, Betsy said, "Let's be blood sisters." Well, I was too scared to prick my own finger, so she pricked both of our fingers, and we held them together in a pinky swear. I don't remember what that oath was, but I do remember that it was best friends forever. I remember that part. Now, fast forward several decades. I learned through her family of Betsy's death. And her family invited all of her classmates, as many as who could come, to dedicate a tree in her memory at our school, our old school. 6 of the 8 girls, now grown, showed up on a cool spring day. After the tree was dedicated, we all went out to dinner together. So many memories were shared that night, including one that surprised us. Janet told about a ritual that Betsy initiated, pricking their fingers to become blood sisters. Betsy was her best friend, Janet said. We went around the table, and every one of us said, she was my best friend too. Mine too. And there was no jealousy, as there might have been when we were girls. It was just a sense of wonder and gratitude and heartfelt connection between this group of girls, now women. Out of her love for each of us, Betsy had made us her own. She wove a thread that connected us, not just to her, but to each other. And recognizing that, well, that affected me deeply. It reminds me of another call to my ministry, a call to loving others as deeply as I can, a call to building closeness and connection in my family, with old and new friends, in a wide variety of school and work settings over the course of my life, and now here with you at First Parish. When you called me as your minister 18 months ago, we truly called each other. This congregation was seeking not just to fill a job, but to be loved, to feel connected, to build a relationship with a minister, someone to share your struggles, celebrate your joys, mourn with you, and lift you up. For us to do that together. This is settled ministry. Not settled in the sense of done or fixed, but settled in our commitment, our promise to each other, promises we made at my installation last March. Some of you were probably here. Here is what you said as a congregation. We hereby install you as our 16th settled minister, sharing leadership and ministry among us. On behalf of the congregation, you will speak the truth in freedom and in love. Minister unto all people in their joys and their sorrows. Celebrate the many blessings of life. Invite people to experience lives transformed by service and shaped by the pursuit of justice, and help us to be models of change in the world. You called me into relationship with you, in joy and sorrow, in celebrating blessings, inviting ourselves to be transformed by service and the pursuit of justice. That does not sound settled, my friends. That sounds active and moving and changing, transforming ourselves and each other. And woven through it all, co-creating the fabric that binds us, is a thread of truth and love. Like those friendship pacts that many of us made in our youth, love and relationship is what we are building here. Not a bond of blood, but one of trust and connection for ourselves, for each other, and as a beacon of hope to the wider world. I am so very grateful to have heard and accepted your call. And I feel blessed to be sharing ministry with you here today and every day. Amen. And now, please rise as you're willing or able and join in our hymn of preparation, number 6, Just as Long as I Have Breath.
It's wonderful to see you all. It's good to be seen. Thank you. Well, some of you know my brother. He was here for a number of years. He sang in the choir. His name is Alan. And I'm standing here as the minister emerita of this, my beloved First Parish in Brookline, because when he was a newborn, he had colic. And my mother, and he had eczema everywhere, and he was impossible to soothe. And my mother was overwhelmed by hours of crying. So let me tell you the story of how that brought me into ministry. Some of you know that 50 years ago, I was an occupational therapist working in an early intervention program. We worked with a team of professionals and non-professionals who did the real work in the homes of young mothers. Early on, we invited a consultant to help us build a strong team between the professionals and the home visitors, who we called core mothers. The consultant invited us to discover the source of each of our commitments to this very challenging work we shared. She allowed us a space, maybe led a meditation, and in that moment of musing, I saw an image so clearly, and I call it my very first memory. I must have been just turned 2. And I saw my 2-year-old self reaching between the bars of my brother's crib to feed him his bottle. I think it must have been my very first chance to do so. And I remember my incredibly intense curiosity. I noticed how he latched onto the nipple. I noticed and heard that special sighing sound of satisfaction that every one of us who has fed a baby, either by nursing or bottle, has heard. And I remembered the feel of that warm glass bottle, heavy in my small hand. And when I was in this memory, I heard my grandmother saying, "Martha really loves Alan." And I couldn't tell her she was wrong, because I just knew that wasn't the case. I was just 2. I was not in love. What I was intrigued. I was fascinated. And love came later. But my curiosity about this little creature calmed him down. The way I paid attention to him made a difference. Curious attention connected and calmed us all. And apparently, I was born with the ability to pay attention in a way that the other feels my presence and is calmed by that visceral, real-life experience of connection. Connection gut to gut, heart to heart, and eye to eye. So I say attention is my superpower. When I became active in my UU church in Canton, I began calling that holy work with infants, especially newborns and preemies. I called that work where I would hold a baby in front of me and wait for that baby to be ready to connect. I didn't go, ooh, or any of those things we do to make babies pay attention. I just made my face still so it could be found. And then slowly but surely, the newborn would turn and look me in the eye. And at that moment, both of our eyes would fill with fluid. I could feel my attention dropping into my belly and a connection that was definitely heart to heart and gut to gut. So when I went to church, I began calling myself and that work a minister. Well, if you've ever been in church for long, and you can know that after being in that church for just 1 year, I was made the head of a committee, the membership committee. And fortunately, they sent me to New England Leadership School. And some of you know I had a very intense mystical experience there, which helped me to understand that something beyond us calms us down, that we never calm ourselves down. There is something that helps us pay attention and collect ourselves. Well, on my drive home from New Hampshire, I remember so clearly hearing a voice close to my ear, but not inside, saying, "You could be a minister." Well, the first thing I did was meet with my therapist. Because between those two experiences, I wondered whether madness was my next career. Well, 7 years later, after diagnosis and treatment for a very treatable cancer, I knew, in the words of Adrienne Rich, that there comes a time when you have to take yourself more seriously or die. And so I took a leap and applied to seminary. That took 7 years of discernment. And 7 years later, I was ordained at Old Ship UU Church in Hingham. That means I was in discernment for 14 years. And all of that discernment brought me to a very soul-satisfying ministry in our family of faith. At the time of my graduation from parish ministry here, because I needed 2 new knees and some very serious back surgery, I regretted leaving at a time when I actually finally felt grounded in my call to ministry. And I missed you every day. In the years since I've left First Parish, I have been a mentor, a coach, and a spiritual friend with religious professionals and overwhelmed climate activists. And now I have the privilege of being a spiritual, theological guide to your wonderful student, Judd. My problem now is that because I left ministry at the top of my game, I don't listen as well as I used to. I tell as much as I know very quickly, filling the airwaves. And Judd knows that I struggle with that. Well, being a grandmother became my primary ministry. In an afternoon with my grandson, Joseph, we were watching something on television, a nature show, and suddenly they were showing dying animals somewhere in the world. And my 7-year-old grandson was distraught. He can't listen to Noah's Ark story. He doesn't even want you to say the name Noah because he knows about all those other animals drowning. He insisted on an explanation. And I told him some about climate change and all the ways people had been trying to change what was happening. And he came up with some ideas of his own. One of them was, can't we get energy from water flushing in our toilets? This is a 7-year-old physics person, I think. And somewhat later, I saw that Oregon is, in fact, getting energy from flushing toilets. Well, he announced to me that I should be like Rosa Parks and risk arrest in nonviolent civil disobedience. How could I say no? And so I was arrested. Madeline Fine came and took pictures. It was wonderful. I really felt like I was your minister in that moment. And I practiced my superpower with the arresting officers. They were very sorry to put the, I'm sorry? Well, with the woman officer who was nearing retirement, we talked about travel and how wonderful it would be together in one of the baths in Budapest. My colleagues were telling the other officers about climate change. That base was covered. And over the course of many rallies and another chance to be arrested, I sang with a community of my neighbors and colleagues of many faiths. We marched, we prayed for the police and the men working on the pipeline. We marched and sang soul to soul, prayerfully singing, "The tide is rising." May we rise in spirit, singing in solidarity with those standing for the justice of earth. Please rise.
Now, please take the hand or touch
Whoop,
the.
whoop, whoop.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Over to Sue.
Please, please join me in our unison affirmation as Judd extinguishes our chalice. We extinguish the flame and not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry with us and offer as gifts unto the world.
And now, please take the hand or touch the shoulder or elbow of someone near you for our benediction.
May we be blessed with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships so that we may live deep within our hearts.
May we be blessed with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace.
May we be blessed by tears, tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, hunger, and war, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort them and turn their pain into joy.
And may we be blessed with enough foolishness to believe that we can make a difference in this world, so that we can do what others claim cannot be done, to bring justice and kindness to all our children and the poor.
Beloved friends, take all that we have shared here today and go out into the world and be a blessing to all those you meet, and may you yourselves be blessed. Amen.